Mara had become an expert at being unseen. She washed up in gas station bathrooms, learned which dumpsters had food that wasn't spoiled, and which alleys were safe enough to sleep in, but hidden enough so no one bothered her. Every night, she and her 9-year-old daughter, Lila, looked for a new place to sleep. Abandoned stairwells, parking garages, behind supermarkets, anywhere. But tonight was different. Winter was coming, and the cold was sinking into her bones faster than ever before. She stood on a highway overpass, wind tearing at her thin jacket, her hands numb from pushing their squeaky shopping cart, their entire life packed under a plastic tarp. Down below, a truck roared by, horn blaring, jolting Mara out of a dangerous moment of hopelessness. She looked at Lila, sleeping curled up under the tarp, clutching her rabbit like it was a lifeline. "Not today," Mara whispered. "Not ever." She had no plan, no home, no money. But in that moment, she made a decision. They would no longer just survive. She would find them shelter. Somewhere safer than alleys and bridges. Somewhere dry. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere they could breathe for just a while. She gently woke Lila. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "Time to move." "Are we going to a real place?" Lila asked, sleepy-eyed. "Kind of," Mara said, forcing a smile. "Remember that old factory I showed you?" Mara and Lila walked through the sleeping city, the shopping cart rattling over cracked sidewalks. Streetlights buzzed overhead. Cars passed occasionally, but no one really saw them. People glanced, then looked away quickly, the way people do when they don't want to feel guilty. They took the back streets, moving through alleys and side roads Mara had memorized over the last few months. She avoided the main intersections where patrol cars liked to sit. The last thing she needed was questions, or worse, someone deciding Lila would be safer somewhere else. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, the skyline shifted. The Harrington textile mill came into view. It loomed on the edge of the city like a tired giant. Rows of broken windows, bricks stained with time, the faded company name barely visible across the front. To most people it was an eyesore. To Mara, it was a possibility. They reached the sagging chain-link fence that wrapped around the property. No trespassing signs hung crooked, rusted, and ignored. "Stay close," Mara said. She led Lila along the fence line until they reached the spot she'd found weeks ago, where someone had cut the fence long ago and someone else had tried to fix it badly with twisted wire. Mara knelt and began unwinding the wire with numb fingers, one careful twist at a time. When the gap was wide enough, she turned to her daughter. "You first, kiddo." Lila squeezed through, clutching her rabbit. On the other side, she turned and whispered, "Come on, Mom." Mara passed their things through, their backpack with clothes, a plastic bin with their kitchen, a small bag of toiletries. Then she squeezed through the gap herself, tugging the wire back into place as best as she could from the inside. "What about the cart?" Lila asked, staring at it through the fence. "We'll leave it," Mara said softly. "We'll find another one someday." They crossed the cracked concrete courtyard toward a set of side doors, one of them already slightly ajar from years of wind and neglect. Inside, the air changed, cold, stale, but still. No wind, no traffic noise. Moonlight poured through broken windows high above, illuminating rows of rusted machines and long dead conveyor belts. The factory floor stretched into darkness. "It's creepy," Lila whispered, pressing against her mother's side. "It's just a building," Mara said gently. "It can't hurt us. And most importantly," she pointed upward, "it's dry." Their footsteps echoed as she led Lila along the factory floor, weaving between hulking machinery until they reached the back of the building. There, above the floor, was a small glass-windowed office, perched like a box on stilts, with a metal staircase leading up to it. Mara had already checked it days ago. The roof above it didn't leak. The door still closed. There was even an old desk inside. They climbed the metal stairs, which creaked under their weight. At the top, Mara turned the knob. The door stuck for a second, then gave way with a groan. Dust swirled in the air, lit by a slice of moonlight sneaking through the grimy window. The room was small, but contained everything they needed: 4 walls, a door, and a roof that held. "Welcome home," Mara said softly. "For now." Lila stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the dust, the cold, the emptiness. "How long can we stay?" she asked. Mara hesitated. "As long as we have to," she said. "As long as it's safe." They dropped their belongings in one corner and began their quiet ritual of making nothing into something. They pushed years of dust into piles with their hands. They spread out their blankets on the concrete floor. They set the camp stove on the old desk and lined their few dishes along the edge like it was a real kitchen shelf. Dinner that night was peanut butter on stale bread, split carefully between them. But for the first time in a long time, there was a door between them and the world. Mara lay awake long after Lila fell asleep, listening to the silence of the empty factory. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, turning the abandoned office into a home. Morning crept into the abandoned office through the dusty glass, casting pale beams of light across their blankets. Mara woke slowly, feeling something unusual. Silence. No traffic noise, no footsteps nearby, no threat of being moved along. Just quiet. Lila was still asleep, curled up with her stuffed rabbit under her arm, breathing softly. For a moment, Mara let herself imagine, what if this wasn't just a shelter? What if it could be home? After breakfast, a granola bar split in half and a little water, Mara stood up and clapped her hands lightly. "School first," she said. Lila groaned playfully but smiled. They didn't have notebooks or textbooks, just a borrowed library book, a dull pencil, and sheets of scrap paper they'd saved from coffee shops. But for 3 hours, Mara taught Lila as best she could, basic math, spelling, reading aloud from library books. When their school day was done, they started on something new, making this place theirs. Mara had collected a few rags from behind a cleaning supply store weeks ago. She filled a cracked bucket with rainwater gathered from a rusty barrel outside. Then they scrubbed. They scrubbed until their knees hurt, until their fingers were raw, until years of grime peeled away to reveal surprisingly smooth concrete beneath. "Mom!" Lila exclaimed, pointing at a cleansed patch. "It's actually kind of pretty." Mara looked at the clean spot, then at her daughter. "Yeah," she smiled. "It really is." They found a few old crates near the factory floor and dragged them up the stairs to the office. A scavenged wooden cable spool became a makeshift table. Then, using torn tarps and plastic sheets from an abandoned construction site nearby, they hung sheets from nails and pipes to divide the room. A sleeping room, a kitchen corner around the camp stove, a living room made of 2 crates, 1 spool, and 3 precious books. Lila carefully arranged their treasures on the makeshift table. Her stuffed rabbit, 3 books, and a single framed photo, Mara, in hospital scrubs years ago, smiling and hopeful, a version of herself that felt like another lifetime. By evening, they sat on the crates, eating canned beans warmed over the camp stove. Outside, broken windows framed a sky streaked with orange and pink. "It's not so bad here," Lila said quietly. Mara looked around, the taped-up walls, the patched blankets, the little tarp rooms, and touched her daughter's hair. "No," she said softly. "It's not." "Mom, when do we get a real home?" Lila asked. Mara hesitated, then said, "Home isn't a building, sweetheart. It's us. As long as we're together, we're home." Lila leaned against her mother, and for the first time in a long time, Mara believed it. Their new life and survival routine. The days slowly began to form a rhythm, a life, not just survival. Mornings were for school. Mara used library books, scrap paper, and worn pencils to teach Lila math, spelling, history, even little science experiments using cups and rainwater. They sat cross-legged on a crate table, sunlight seeping through the dusty window, turning their little office into a classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was learning, and it was hope. Afternoons, Mara left. It took everything in her not to worry, but Lila was old enough now to stay in the office alone for a few hours, only after strict warning. Don't go downstairs. Don't touch the stove. Don't open the door. Hide if you hear voices downstairs. Don't tell anyone you live here. While Lila stayed inside, reading or drawing pictures of what their real home would look like one day, Mara hustled. She collected cans and bottles for recycling, swept storage garages for cash, cleaned gutters, wiped windows, scrubbed graffiti, sometimes peeled potatoes or chopped vegetables behind restaurant kitchens, held signs at intersections for going out of business sales, dug through bins, looking not for food, but for anything she could wash, fix, or maybe even sell. She learned which dumpsters had surviving bread at night, which police officers looked the other way, which churches served lunch on Wednesdays, where she could stand outside and catch free Wi-Fi so Lila could sometimes watch educational videos on her cracked phone. As the cold deepened, the mill felt less like a building and more like protection. They stuffed rags and newspaper under the door gaps, layered cardboard under their blankets, burned stubs of candles in a tin can for just a hint of warmth, found wooden pallets to lift their bedding off the freezing concrete. And slowly, the bitterness of winter began to feel less terrifying. Because, unlike last year, this time they had a door. Walls. A place where the wind couldn't steal their warmth. A place no one kicked them out of at morning light. And through it all, Mara saved. Coins, tips, crumpled bills, tiny leftovers of hope. She stored them in an empty vitamin bottle, their emergency vault. After months of scraping and surviving, she finally opened it and counted $92.67. It wasn't enough to change their life, but it was enough to try. The $50 storage unit gamble. It was a biting February morning when Mara met Leon, the older man who collected scrap metal behind the thrift store. He wore 3 coats and still shivered, his gray beard stiff with frost. "Morning, Red," he greeted her. He always called her that because of her faded hoodie. "Got your little one still at the old mill?" he asked quietly, like he was asking about a secret. Mara nodded. "Safe and warm, for now." "No scrap left here," he said, kicking at a piece of broken shelving. "But I heard something you might want to know." Mara paused. "What?" "Storage auctions," he said. "Riverside Storage, today at noon. Folks don't pay their rent, and their stuff gets auctioned off. Sometimes it's junk, but sometimes," he rubbed his fingers together, "there's treasure." Treasure. Not gold, not jewels, but maybe something they could sell. Something worth enough to get real heat, real food, real safety. "What do I need?" she asked. "Cash," Leon said. "Minimum $50 usually." Her heart sank. $50 was over half of everything she'd saved, everything they'd scraped together for blankets, medicine, bus fares, food. But then she thought of Lila's cough last night, the cold creeping deeper, the pallets not working as well anymore, the last candle almost gone. She looked at Leon. "Where?" she asked. At noon she returned to the office. "Pack up," she told Lila. "We're going on an adventure." "What kind of adventure?" Lila asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "The kind that might change everything," Mara said. They spent $4 on bus fare, painful but necessary. Riverside Storage was a wide yard of orange doors and concrete lanes. About 20 people were there, most seasoned buyers, men with pickup trucks, clipboards, flashlights, knowing exactly what to look for. Mara and Lila stood at the back. They looked out of place. Not bidders, not dealers, not professionals, just two people searching for a break. The auction moved fast. Doors rolled open just a few feet, enough to peek inside, never enough to step in. "Unit 121 starting at 200. Unit 146 starting at 350. People shouted bids. Money moved fast, too fast. Mara's money, her precious $92, felt small and fragile. Then they reached Unit 118. 6 months unpaid. Owner deceased. No heirs. Starting bid, $50. The door rattled open halfway. Inside, water-stained boxes, stacks of old magazines, a broken dresser, a sewing machine, everything covered in dust and mold. The professionals barely bothered to look. The auctioneer repeated, $50, anyone? Silence. Then, Mara heard her own voice say, $50. Even she looked shocked. Heads turned. The auctioneer lifted an eyebrow in surprise and amusement. $50 going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the red hoodie. People around them smirked. Someone muttered, "Waste of money." Mara's hands trembled. She had just spent more than half their savings on what looked like literal trash. Lila tugged her sleeve. "Mama, what did you do?" Mara didn't know how to answer, but somewhere deep in her gut, something told her she hadn't made a mistake. Not yet. The hidden wall and the secret toolbox. Mara and Lila stood inside Unit 118, surrounded by peeling cardboard, moldy clothes, and stacks of old magazines no collector would ever want. The smell of damp paper and mildew filled the air. Lila kicked at a ruined box. "Mama, we could have bought blankets, food. Why did you waste it on this?" Mara's heart sank. She didn't have an answer. I just had a feeling," she said quietly. "Maybe I was wrong." They began sorting the unit anyway. Keep pile. A butterfly glass paperweight, 3 chipped ceramic mugs, a tarnished picture frame, a semi-intact sewing kit. Trash pile. Everything else. Everything else. After hours of digging, their keep pile looked hopeless. Nothing worth even $10, let alone 50. They sat on the cold concrete floor, splitting a single peanut butter sandwich. Silent, tired, defeated. "We should go," Mara said softly. "We'll take what we can carry. Maybe come back tomorrow." But then, as Mara lifted a stack of mildewed magazines, something odd caught her eye. The back wall. It looked different. The water damage wasn't random. It wasn't blotchy or messy like normal stains. It formed straight lines, vertical, evenly spaced, like seams. "Lila," she whispered, "bring the flashlight." They moved boxes aside, revealing wood paneling, cheap, old-fashioned. Mara pressed her fingertips along one seam. It shifted. Her breath caught. She dug her nails in, pulling carefully. Crack! A panel came loose. Behind it, darkness. A hollow space about 2 feet deep. "A secret wall," Lila whispered. "Like in books," Mara replied, heart pounding. Inside, dusty and untouched, were 3 objects. A heavy metal toolbox locked with 3 old combination locks. A large manila envelope sealed shut with red wax. A small wooden carved box. They carried them out into the light. The wooden box opened easily. Inside lay old black-and-white photographs, well preserved. A man in his 40s with kind eyes, smiling confidently. Workers standing proudly in front of a textile mill. A teenage girl beside him, smiling, holding fishing poles. On the back of one photo, in faded ink, "Opening Day, 1964. We were going to change the world. Daniel Harrington." Mara froze. It was the building they lived in. The Harrington Textile Mill. Their shelter. Their home. Next, Mara gently cracked the red wax on the manila envelope. Inside, pages of a letter. The handwriting was shaky but elegant. "Read it," Lila whispered. Mara began. "My name is Eleanor Harrington. I am 74 years old, and I am a coward." It told a story of a family-owned mill, a brother, Daniel Harrington, who fought for worker safety, a corrupt floor manager named Dale Pierce, who falsified safety reports, a suspicious accident, and a truth sealed away in this very toolbox. A truth someone had been too scared to bring into the light. Lila looked at her mother. "Mama, who keeps a secret for 40 years? "Someone afraid," Mara whispered, "or someone waiting for the right person to find it." They couldn't open the toolbox, but they didn't need to, not yet. Because one thing was certain, this wasn't junk. It wasn't trash. It was evidence. It was history. It was truth. And somehow, it now belonged to a homeless mother and her little girl who had just spent their last $50 searching for hope. The letter's meaning and a life-changing decision. Night had fallen by the time Mara and Lila returned to the abandoned mill, but somehow it no longer felt like a ruin, not after what they'd discovered. They set the toolbox, the old photographs, and the sealed letter carefully on their makeshift spool table. The flicker of a candle cast dancing shadows across the dusty walls. Lila sat cross-legged, eyes wide. "Mama, read it again, from the beginning." Mara unfolded the brittle paper. Her voice was soft, but the words felt heavy, alive. "My name is Eleanor Harrington. I am 74 years old, and I am a coward." She paused, took a breath, and kept reading. "This mill belonged to my father. When he died, it passed to me and to my brother Daniel. He loved this place. He believed workers deserved safety, dignity, and respect. He tried to fix things, and that is why they killed him." Mara stopped. Lila's eyes widened. "Killed him?" Mara nodded slowly. "That's what she wrote." She continued reading. "The accident wasn't an accident. He found proof that the floor manager, Dale Pierce, was embezzling money, stealing funds meant for repairs, safety, and workers' protection. My brother reported it. 3 days later, a machine malfunctioned. Only it wasn't a malfunction." Silence. The room felt colder. Mara pressed on. "They silenced him. Then they covered it up. The doctored reports, altered maintenance logs, forged signatures. Everything you need to prove it is inside the locked toolbox. I should have gone to the police. I should have fought for justice. But I was afraid. So I closed the mill, locked away the truth, and walked away." Lila whispered, "She was scared. Like us." Mara nodded. If you found this, maybe you are braver than I ever was. Maybe it's time the truth finally found the light." At the bottom of the letter, a final line. "I never sold the mill. I never could. It still belongs to me, or to whoever has the courage to do what I could not." The candle flickered. Between them lay 3 things: a locked toolbox full of evidence, ownership papers for the mill they lived in, and a truth buried for 40 years. Lila looked at her mother. "Mom, does this mean this place belongs to her?" Mara nodded. "Yes, to Eleanor Harrington." "Then who does it belong to now?" Lila asked softly. Mara stared at the faded signature at the bottom of the letter. Eleanor Harrington. Deceased. No heirs. No one left to claim it. Except someone who had found it. Someone who cared. Someone who had nothing. And yet, maybe now, had everything. Mara whispered, barely audible, "We're going to find out the truth, Lila. We're going to finish what Eleanor started." "But how?" Lila asked. Mara looked down at the locked toolbox. "We find someone who can open it. And then?" Mara looked at her daughter. "Then we make sure the world finally hears the truth." The library investigation and tracing the past. The next morning the old mill felt different. Not just like a shelter, but like a secret. A story waiting to be told. Mara packed everything carefully. The photographs, the letter, the locked toolbox, too heavy, so she wrapped it and hid it safely at the mill. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, pulling on her coat. "To learn," Mara said. "To find answers." They took the early bus, 2 more precious dollars gone, and headed to the public library. The library was more than just books to them. It was warmth, restrooms with soap, Wi-Fi, a safe place where no one asked questions. But today, for the first time, they weren't just visiting. They were investigating.
Mara sat down at the computer and typed slowly, fingers trembling.
Daniel Harrington Textile Mill Accident, 1983. A few old newspaper archives appeared. Local mill co-owner killed in machinery accident, October 1983. Industrial safety investigation, no evidence of foul play. Harrington Textile Mill closes permanently. But then Mara found something else. Another article, short, easily overlooked. 5 other workers died in separate accidents at the same mill between 1983 and 1987. She stared at it. 5 more. Not one accident. 6. 6 families, 6 secrets, 6 lives brushed away as if they never mattered. Lila tugged her sleeve. "Mom, what if nobody ever knew the truth?" Mara nodded slowly. "I think someone knew," she said. "They just didn't have proof." Then she searched. Dale Pierce, Harrington Mill. Her breath caught. He wasn't just alive. He was famous. He'd become a wealthy businessman, owned multiple consulting firms, spoke at safety conferences, even had a street and scholarship named after him. To the world, he was a philanthropist. Only they now held the truth. Finally, she searched. Margaret Harrington Daniels' daughter. The girl in the photo. It took time, but eventually, they found her. A school website, faculty page, history teacher. Margaret Harrington Hoskins, age 52, West Side High School, just 12 miles away. Lila stared at the photo. "That's her," she whispered. "The girl from the fishing picture." Mara felt something shift. The truth wasn't trapped in the past anymore. It could be delivered to the right person. But how? They spent their last few cents printing out the photograph and a copy of the letter's first page. Then, using free paper from the library, Mara began to write. "Dear Miss Harrington, you don't know me, but I found something that belongs to your family. I believe it holds the truth your father never got to tell. If you want to know more, please meet me." She paused. Where? It had to be safe, public, somewhere quiet but open. She wrote, "Riverfront Park, this Saturday at 2 p.m. I will be near the fountain. I will be with my daughter, a friend." She folded the photo inside, placed everything in an envelope, and mailed it from the library's drop box. And now, they waited. On the bus ride back, Lila rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, almost afraid to ask, "do you think she'll come?" Mara looked at her, at the hope in her eyes. "I think," she said softly, "some truths wait a lifetime for someone brave enough to find them. And maybe, just maybe," she smiled gently, "that someone is us." The meeting at the park, when the past walks in. Saturday arrived cold and quiet, the kind of morning where frost paints the grass silver and the air bites at your lungs. Mara dressed Lila in her cleanest clothes, a worn sweater, patched jeans, her stuffed rabbit tucked safely into her backpack. They took the early bus, hands tucked into sleeves to stay warm. They reached Riverfront Park by 1:30 p.m. The fountain wasn't running, winter had shut it off, but it stood like a monument, still and silent. They sat on a bench, waiting. 2 p.m. Nothing. 2:07 p.m. No one. Lila shifted nervously. "Maybe she didn't come," she whispered. "Maybe she thought it was fake." Mara fought doubt. "Sometimes people just need time." 2:14 p.m. A silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. A woman stepped out, tall, straight-backed, dressed simply, like someone who used to care deeply about appearances, but no longer did. She stood for a moment, scanning the park. Her eyes landed on them, a mother, a child, a worn envelope in hand. She walked toward them, slow steps, almost hesitant. She stopped a few feet away. "You sent the letter," she said. Her voice was steady, but something in it trembled. Mara nodded. "You said you had something that belonged to my father." Mara reached into her bag and pulled out the small, carved wooden box containing the photos. She held it out. The woman didn't take it at first. She just stared. Then, very slowly, she reached out. Her fingers shook. She opened the box. Inside, the photograph of a smiling man, Daniel Harrington, standing in front of the textile mill, holding hands with a teenage girl. On the back, fishing trip, 1982, Margaret's 13th birthday. The woman pressed a hand to her mouth. "My father," she whispered, voice cracking. "I lost this picture when we left." She turned to them. "Where did you find this?" Mara answered gently. "In a storage unit, hidden behind a false wall, along with something else." She handed her the copied first page of Eleanor's letter. Margaret read silently. Her hands slowly began to shake. Tears dropped onto the page. "When I was little," she whispered, "I told people my father's accident wasn't an accident. No one believed me." She looked up. Now, someone finally did. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her. Not as a history teacher, not as a quiet woman living alone, but as the daughter of a man who tried to tell the truth. Slowly, she sat beside them. "Where's the rest?" she asked softly. "The rest?" Mara said carefully, "is in a locked metal box, with 3 locks, in our care, but we haven't opened it." Margaret stared at them. "You kept it safe?" Mara nodded. Margaret took a deep breath. "I know someone who can open it," she whispered. Lila looked up. "Who?" Margaret's voice was low, steady, certain. "A retired detective. A man who left the police force because he knew something didn't add up in my father's case." She stood up, looked at Mara. "You found the truth. Now we need to finish it." She extended her hand, not just offering a handshake, but offering trust, offering belief, offering a path forward. Mara took it and squeezed. For the first time in a long time, they weren't invisible anymore. The detective, the truth unlocked, and the first signs of danger. Margaret arranged the meeting, not at her home, not at a police station, but in a closed cafe after hours, owned by her cousin, safe, quiet, no cameras. They arrived just before sunset. Mara and Lila entered, holding the wrapped toolbox like something sacred. Sitting at a corner table was Frank Olay, a retired detective, early 60s, salt and pepper beard, calm eyes that had seen too much. He didn't shake hands, he just nodded once, the kind of nod that meant, "I take this seriously." Margaret introduced them, then carefully set the toolbox on the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Frank studied the locks. "These aren't just regular locks," he murmured. "These were designed to keep something hidden. Something someone was afraid of, or protecting." He began working quietly with his tools. The room was still. Lila held her stuffed rabbit tightly. Margaret watched like someone bracing for answers she had waited half a lifetime for. Mara couldn't help but wonder, was this the moment everything changed? Or the moment things got dangerous? Click! One lock opened, then the second. The third was stubborn, old, rusted, but click! Frank slowly opened the lid. Silence. Inside lay a leather-bound journal stamped D. Harrington Original and falsified safety inspection reports. Photos of broken machines, missing guards, cut wires, financial records showing stolen repair funds. A cassette tape labeled Pierce, October 12th, 1983. Don't trust him. And at the very bottom, a folded legal document. Property title: The Harrington Textile Mill. Registered owner: Eleanor Harrington. Unclaimed, never sold. Meaning, it legally belonged to whoever inherited it. Margaret stared at it. "My family never sold it," she whispered. Mara felt her heart pound. They hadn't just been hiding in an abandoned building. They had been living inside a secret crime scene. A building that told a story someone tried desperately to bury. Frank looked up slowly. "You all need to understand something," he said quietly. "If this is real, and it looks very real, then someone covered up more than an accident. This is evidence. And if the man behind it is still alive," he paused, "he already knows someone has this." Just then, headlights swept across the front windows. A car, engine idling, two silhouettes inside, watching, not getting out, just watching. Frank reacted instantly. He closed the toolbox, pulled the documents into his bag, then he looked at all of them. "From this point on," he said firmly, "we do not walk alone. We do not use phones, and we do not assume we are safe." He turned to Mara. "You found something powerful," he said softly. Then to Margaret, "And you are the proof it matters." Then to little Lila, "And she?" He paused, voice tight. "She is why we finish this." The escape, the offer, and the truth begins to surface. The cafe felt suddenly smaller. Frank moved quickly, gathering the papers, the journal, the property deed, the cassette, placing everything into a protective case. "Listen carefully," he said. "That car outside isn't random. They're watching, testing, seeing what we do." Margaret looked shaken. "You think they know?" Frank nodded. "Not everything, but enough to be nervous." He turned to Mara. "From now on, you don't go back to the mill. It's not safe." Mara froze. "That's our home," she said softly. "It's all we have." Margaret quietly placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not anymore," she said. "You have me now." Frank outlined the plan. No returning to the mill tonight. No phones. They could be tracked. Travel separately, different vehicles. Meet tomorrow at attorney Eliza Chen's office. She specializes in corporate misconduct and whistleblower cases. He handed everyone small flashlights and emergency paper directions. No digital trail. "I'll take the evidence to Eliza," he said. "If they want to follow someone, Let them follow me. Margaret turned to Mara and Lila. You're coming with me. Tonight. She wasn't asking. Frank walked out the front door, toolbox under his arm, visible, like bait. The black sedan moved, engine started, headlights turned. It followed him. Now, he whispered. Margaret, Mara, and Lila slipped out the back door into a narrow alley, their breath cloudy in the cold night air. They kept to the shadows, hurrying but not running. At the end of the alley, Margaret hailed a passing taxi. She didn't say a word until they were 4 blocks away. Then finally, "You're safe now," she whispered, but her voice didn't quite sound convinced. That night, for the first time since becoming homeless, Mara and Lila slept under a real roof. A small, modest house. Margaret's house. Warm, quiet, safe. They slept without fear, but not without questions. The next day, at the lawyer's office, 10 a.m., Eliza Chen, attorney at law. A small office, stacks of legal files, coffee brewing in the corner. Eliza, sharp-minded, calm, early 40s, the kind of woman who sees through excuses. She carefully examined the evidence, the journals, the forged reports, the photographs, and the cassette tape. "This," she said quietly, "is enough to expose everything." Not for criminal charges, too much time has passed, but enough to destroy reputations, reopen investigations, and change public opinion. Frank nodded, and possibly leak to the press, if necessary. Eliza looked at Mara. "You understand. Once this goes public, there is no going back." Mara nodded. "I've been invisible for too long," she said. "It's time someone finally sees us." Then came the offer. Eliza's assistant entered, hesitant. There's someone here, a lawyer, says he represents Pierce Holdings?" The room froze. Eliza opened the door. In walked a polished man in a tailored suit, confident, calm, smiling. The kind of smile that isn't really a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he greeted, "let's all be reasonable." He placed an envelope on the table. "My client is prepared to offer a confidential settlement in exchange for the return and destruction of all documents." "How much?" Frank asked quietly. The man smiled. $3 million. Cash, no questions asked. Silence. Mara stared at the envelope. $3 million. A real home, medicine for Lila, a car, a life. The man leaned in. "You could live comfortably, start over. No danger, no noise, no publicity." Mara looked at Lila, then at Margaret, then at the old toolbox, and she said softly, "No." The lawyer blinked. "You don't understand," he said calmly. "You're homeless, a nobody. You have no proof anyone will even believe you." Mara stood up, straightened her posture, and replied, "I used to believe that too, but not anymore." He stared at her for a long moment, then quietly collected the envelope. "Then I'll tell my client," he said. "He won't be happy." He paused. "And I can't protect you from what comes next." He closed the door, left. Frank exhaled slowly. "That," he said, "was a threat." Eliza nodded.
And now things get real. She looked at all of them. This won't be safe, but it will be right. And then she said, "It's time to tell the world." The decision was made. No more secrecy, no more silence, no more running. It was time to bring the truth forward. Eliza contacted a journalist, Jake Miller. Not a tabloid reporter, not someone chasing headlines, but an investigative journalist known for uncovering corporate cover-ups and stories that mattered. They met him at a small corner cafe. He didn't speak much at first, just listened.
Listened as Frank described the doctored reports. Listened as Margaret talked about her father's suspicious death. Listened as Mara explained how a homeless woman and her daughter stumbled upon a truth buried for 40 years. Jake's pen stopped moving. "Wait," he said, looking up at Mara. "You were living inside the mill? The same one connected to all this?" Mara nodded. "Yes, as our home." He stared at her, not with pity, but with recognition, as though for the first time someone saw her not as a homeless mother, but as the woman who discovered the truth. Jake's voice was soft. "If what you're telling me is true, this won't just be a story. It will be a case." The story spreads quietly, then loudly. Jake didn't rush. He confirmed every document, every photo, every report. He tracked down 2 other families who had also lost loved ones in accidents at the mill. He interviewed a former maintenance employee, now elderly, who whispered,
"We all knew Pierce was cutting corners, but you didn't accuse him. People who didn't stay long." A week later, a story appeared online. New evidence challenges decades-old mill accident case. Family claims death was covered up. 3 days later, it hit the front page. The truth buried in Harrington Mill corruption. Forgery. 5 deaths. 1 silenced whistleblower, and the headline that captured everyone: "Homeless mother uncovers evidence hidden for 40 years." The public reacted. People didn't see Mara as homeless. They saw her as courageous. People didn't see Margaret as just a teacher. They saw her as a daughter fighting for her father's name. And they didn't see Daniel Harrington as just another forgotten accident victim. They saw him as a man who told the truth and paid for it. And then the calls began. Local news, documentary filmmakers, a law firm representing the other families. Even Pierce's consulting company began removing his name from websites. Quiet panic, because now the truth wasn't hidden in a box. It was viral. One evening, after the story aired on TV, Mara and Lila sat quietly in Margaret's living room. Lila turned to her mother. "Mama." "Yes?" "Are we still invisible?" Mara looked at her, at the girl who once slept under bridges, who once whispered, "Will we ever have a real home?" She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's eyes. "No, baby," she whispered, "not anymore." The final confession. When truth faces its maker, there are moments in life when silence weighs more than words. This was one of them. It was time to confront the man who had buried the truth. Eliza's law office, neutral meeting room, a long conference table, no cameras, no media, just truth, and what people chose to do with it. Eliza, Frank, Margaret, Mara, and little Lila sat quietly at one side. The door opened. In walked Dale Pierce. Not the confident businessman from newspaper articles, not the polished philanthropist, but an old man, carefully dressed but tired, eyes sharp but weary. His lawyer walked beside him, along with a younger man, early 30s, his grandson. Nobody spoke. Not yet. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "You stood next to me at my father's funeral," she said quietly. "You told me he died a hero. You even gave me flowers." Pierce's jaw tightened. Margaret unfolded a photograph and placed it on the table. Her father, standing in front of the mill, smiling, alive. "You knew," she whispered. "You always knew." Pierce didn't look at the photo. He didn't look at Margaret. He looked at Mara. "You're the woman who found the box." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "And you didn't sell it?" "No." "You didn't destroy it?" "No." He stared at her. Then, in a voice softer than anyone expected, he asked, "Why?" Mara paused. Then quietly, "Because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where truth still matters." Silence. It filled the room like cold air. Pierce's lawyer slid papers forward. A settlement agreement, money. Silence. No admission of guilt. It was clean, safe, easy, but not right. Frank pushed it back gently. "We're not here for money," he said. "We're here for the truth." And then something changed. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the picture. Maybe it was the way Margaret's hands trembled as she held it. But suddenly, Pierce looked tired of hiding. He spoke. At first, just 5 words. "I never meant to kill him." Not quite confession, not quite denial. Then he continued, slowly, painfully. "I falsified reports. I moved funds. I cut corners. I kept quiet about injuries. And yes, Daniel found out." And then his voice cracked. "I thought I could scare him into silence. I didn't mean for... It wasn't supposed to..." He stopped talking. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood. He never meant to kill Daniel. But he did. He didn't order a murder. But he set the stage. He didn't pull the trigger. But he unbolted the machine. Margaret didn't say anything. She just placed her father's journal in front of him. He stared at it, as if it could see him. Then Pierce looked across the table, at the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, at the woman who lived in his deserted factory, at the daughter of the man he silenced. And he said, "I can't undo what I did, but I will not hide from it any more." And then he signed, not a settlement, not a payout agreement, but a written confession to be released to the families, to the public, to history, no money, just truth. As he stood to leave, his grandson looked at him hurt, ashamed, but also relieved, because lies don't just bury the truth. They bury everyone who tries to protect them. And finally, the truth was free. Before he left the room, Pierce paused, looked at Mara, and said, "You could have sold it. You could have disappeared, but you didn't. The world may forget me, but it won't forget you." He walked out of the room, not with dignity, but with honesty, for the first time in 40 years. New beginnings, life after the truth. Truth does not fix everything. It cannot erase pain. It cannot bring back the people who were lost. It cannot rewrite the past. But it can do something else. It can set the future on a different path. And that's what began to happen. The story broke wide open. National newspaper headlines. 40-year cover-up. Textile magnate confesses to negligence in 6 deaths. TV interviews. Documentary offers. Legal investigations reopened, not just about one mill, but other buildings, other companies, other accidents. People who had been silent began to talk. Workers, inspectors, families. Truth had been buried, but now it was spreading. The settlement was finalized, not in secret, not behind closed doors, publicly, with full acknowledgement. $15 million compensation fund for the 6 affected families. $10 million to create. The Daniel Harrington Foundation, for workplace safety and workers' rights. And most importantly, a full written and filmed admission from Dale Pierce, archived in state records and the National Labor Safety Museum. But there was something even more powerful. Margaret inherited the Harrington textile mill. She could have sold it, developed it, demolished it. Instead, she chose something different. She stood inside that old building, once a factory, once a graveyard of secrets, and said, "This place doesn't need to be torn down. It needs to be rebuilt." Half of it is being transformed into a workers' memorial and museum, telling stories of those who were silenced. The other half into affordable housing, especially for displaced families and single mothers, including 2 people who once lived there in secret. 6 months later, Mara now works as a night custodian at Mercy Hospital, the same hospital where she once worked before life fell apart. She is respected. She has co-workers, a schedule, a name badge. She has security. She has dignity. Lila now attends school. She has a backpack, a desk, real friends. She still carries her stuffed rabbit, but now it sits on her bed, her real bed, in their real home. Their first home wasn't perfect. A small 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, peeling wallpaper, cracked tiles, secondhand furniture. But it had warmth and safety and laughter. And at night, when the lights go out and the city hums softly outside the window, it feels like peace. One evening, while helping Lila with homework, Mara paused, watching her daughter, writing, smiling, alive, and she realized something. "We didn't just find the truth," she whispered. "We lived it." Lila looked up. "What do you mean, Mama?" Mara smiled. "It means sometimes the people no one sees are the ones who change everything. Some stories don't start in warm homes or happy places. They start in shadows, in silence, in old forgotten rooms where no one ever looked. This one started under a bridge and somehow led to the truth that had been hidden for decades, a truth that gave names back to the forgotten, a truth that turned a homeless mother into a voice that could not be ignored, and proved that you don't need power, money, or status to change everything. You just need courage, because sometimes the people no one sees are the ones who bring light to the darkest places. You never know who holds the missing piece of history. It might just be the person the world overlooks. If this story touched your heart, if you believe truth can still win, if you think people like Mara and Lila deserve to be seen, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this story reach more people, people who may need a little reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. What do you think is more valuable, money or truth? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Music fades out slowly